The usage of the term choice in this context, in my opinion, is extremely deceptive. First off, in many places, like in Iran, there's no choice involved. It's the law. If you transgress it, you're imprisoned, you're fined, you're flogged, and even worse. In other countries where it's not the law, it's effectively so because of intimidation and pressure from parasitical, self-appointed, so-called community and Islamic leaders and family members. You know, just to give you an example of what happens in Europe to create that climate of intimidation and fear for women and girls. There's this joint statement of Muslim groups, scholars, and leaders in Britain. Now, in my opinion, these groups are very much the public relations arm of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Republic of Iran. They give it a palatable image for Europeans and make it more palatable. But if you look at their statement, now this is a mainstream Islamic organization in Britain. That is an umbrella group for 400 mosques, Islamic organizations, some of which actually want an Islamic state and are fighting for it, and support jihad, support suicide bombings, and so on and so forth. But this is a mainstream Islamic organization in Britain. When there was discussions around the veil, they issued a statement saying that the veil is, quote, not open to debate. And the statement then says, quote, we advise all Muslims to exercise extreme caution in this issue, since denying any part of Islam may lead to disbelief. And then it tells them you have to keep this debate within the realm of scholarly discussion amongst the people of knowledge and authority in the Muslim community. And we know what this means. That it leads to disbelief, that means that's a crime punishable by death in countries ruled by Islam. So it's clear what this sort of statement means, and this is coming from a mainstream, so-called mainstream Islamic organization in Britain. There was a recent Channel 4 television program that actually went undercover in some of the mosques. And they filmed, again, a mainstream Birmingham mosque in the city of Birmingham. And the mullah there, the main person there, he was recorded as saying, Allah has created the woman deficient. And there was another satellite broadcast that came into that mosque from the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Sheikh. And he came in and said that children who don't pray or don't wear the veil must be beaten. So these are the sorts of climates that's created that causes intimidation and fear for a lot of women to be veiled. And of course, I think we've all heard about the Islamic cleric, the Grand Mufti in Australia, who had actually compared unveiled women with uncovered meat. I think you must have all heard about this in the papers, where he said, if you take that uncovered meat and you put it outside without cover and the cats come to eat it, well, whose fault is it? Is it the cats or the uncovered meats? And basically, he says, this is quote, the uncovered meat is the problem. If she was in her room, in her home, in her hijab, no problem would have occurred. And this is to justify the rape, gang rape of a woman. So obviously we know misogynist sermons or anti-women sermons are part of very much the norm in mosques across the world and in all religions. Let me just be clear, I don't think this is an issue with Islam alone, but it is of concern because Islam is a religion in power or vying for power, so it makes it a very different situation. But what I wanted to do by giving you these examples is to show you how even in Europe there can be created a climate where women are intimidated and feel fearful and therefore forced to wear the veil. Now, if you remove all these threats, if you remove the intimidations, I'm not talking about countries where it's compulsory, but where it's not compulsory, I would say, go so far as to say that a vast majority of people will not want to be veiled. They will not choose to be veiled. They will not want to be in a mobile prison day in and day out. Other than, of course, there are a group of people who are completely veiled nowadays, and I think they're showing their allegiance to the political Islamic movement. It's a different issue, but I'm talking about in general terms. Also, I mean, the whole issue of a woman's right to choose. this has to be preceded by, at the very least, legal and social sexual equality. This is not the case for most women. And so if you consider the veil on a huge social scale, it represents neither a right nor a choice, and it is a lie to say otherwise. Of course, women wear miniskirts and, Jimmy shoes, the very high-heeled, fashionable shoes that you see on Sex and the City, that show. Because, that's what the Islamists say, oh, those who aren't veiled are all, whores wearing miniskirts and Jimmy shoes. Well, they don't say Jimmy shoes, they don't know what that is. And one of the things is, of course, women are under pressure to wear miniskirts, to wear Jimmy shoes, from fashion industry's impossible ideals. We often hear that argument, well, that's the other side of the veil. But I think it's ridiculous to compare the miniskirt with the veil, just as it is to compare these high-heel shoes with foot binding, which was actually an act of breaking a woman's foot, binding it so that she won't wander away from her husband or from her male guardian. Very, very different things. And I think it's a big mistake to try to compare the two, which is often done by Islamists and their apologists. And the veil, we hear on and on again about how it's a piece of clothing. I'm sorry, it's not a cloth, it's not a piece of clothing. Though it's often compared to all the other nude type of clothing we unveiled women seem to wear. But for me, it's not a piece of clothing in the same way that a straitjacket is not a piece of clothing. Just like the Star of David is not a piece of clothing. Just as the chastity belt is not a piece of clothing. Very different. And we have to be careful not to allow the discourse of Islamists to take over rights discourse, women's rights discourse, and the fact that we need to challenge and condemn the veil unequivocally.